G'day everyone, it's Mike from Battlefield Accessories here. Pretty exciting day for us today. This is the official launch date of our new Hex system. For those people who have been following our blog, we've been working around the Hex system, prototyping various bits and pieces, but it's now an official product. So it's based on these baseboards, generic hexes that then lock onto the top of that baseboard, some specialist hexes for edges, locking tools that actually help lock the boards together, foam tiles for doing raised up sections or even trenches if you wanted to, some other specialist pieces like rivers, things like that. So as I said, we're pretty excited about this product. If you stay and watch the video, you'll have some shots of some terrains that we've set up, a little bit of a video of me setting up some terrain, and then some construction video in terms of how to build the baseboard, which is really the only construction part that you need. And then finally a little bit of some sort of tips and tricks in terms of how to actually decorate the hexes themselves. Enjoy! Okay, so here we go. I'm going to set up a sample terrain for you to give you an idea of how long it takes. So, arranging my boards. Got my alignment arrow. Now if I had additional boards here, then I would put this on that position there, but because I'm only doing these two, I'm just going to whack that in there. You can see that's gone on perfectly, which means they're all in position. Now I tend to start with things like hills, so just for argument's sake I'm going to put a hill right here in the middle. You can see how that's been lined up there. I might run a bit of a road around it, so I've got a stack of road pieces here. Now with these road pieces, all I've done is taken a plain hex, put flock or basing mix over it, and then just scratched out where I want the road to go. I've just made sure I have it coming out of the same point on either side, so that gives me a generic road section I can use over and over wherever I want. I've made a few variants, example like this. Of course, if I wanted to have ones that say had hills with road, then I could do that sort of thing too. Alright, and I've got a big handful of plain hexes, although what I might do first is I might put a few extra fields and woods on. So let's say I wanted to have some woods here along this road. Do that, make some fields over here on the side. Right, once I'm happy with that, I then just fill in all the blanks with my plain hexes. These positions here I could use a fish hex, of course. Looks a bit like this. So you can see my joiners have completely disappeared, and I can keep laying out terrain as much as I like. And so hopefully get a sense that here I've set myself up custom terrain. But I decide that, you know what, I really want that road to go straight on rather than curve around there. And that's easy, I can just pick it up, grab my straight on, flip that road around there like that. fill in the gaps with some plain tiles. Okay, so as you can see, very, very flexible in terms of its terrain layout, very quick to set up. One of the things that we've done is bought these fantastic boxes from the reject shop. I think they're $16 each. You can see they stack hexes in perfectly like this. I think you probably get a full board's worth of hexes in one of these boxes. Of course, if you're going to do things with hills and stuff, they're a little bit thicker, so they take up a little bit more space. So as you can see, we've got a really great arrangement here in terms of setting up terrain. Yeah, we're really happy with it, and I hope you like it too. So people often have been asking me, well, what sort of scale is this designed for? And it's really designed for any scale that you want. In the end, the features you put on top will determine what scale. So for example, here's some 15mm flames of war miniatures. You've got a little Panzer IV and a German engineer squad working perfectly at that scale. But if I pull them off, instead, if I put a 28mm Bavarian barn and some US paratroopers, and some 28mm trees, suddenly I got a really nice 28mm board. Now, I'm reusing these notionally 15mm roads. They're a bit more of a track now. If I wanted proper roads, then I'd have to make a different style of surface on my hex. And so, for example, I could on this side have the track, and on this side make it much broader for a 28mm road. Right, and so really the artistic bit of it, right, the modelling bit, is up to you. What we're basically doing is we're providing you with the hexes, right, that give you the flexibility to then make your own flexible terrain set. Block for your terrain setup. You get a sprue of these, so I'm going to show you in the video how you actually stick these together, but basically there's enough within this sprue to cover one board with two sets of spares just in case you lose a piece. You get a bunch of these hexes, right, which we notionally call fish because of the obvious shape. Now these are designed to fit on the edge of the board, but you can also, with two of them, put them inside the hex system like that, and they actually match up really nicely too, and I'll show you some completed ones of those later. And then a bunch of normal hexes. Now, feature of this, you'll notice that the hex has got a corner cut. So it's got a corner cut here, and the idea is that that sits on top of the spike. Final thing that you receive are these. Now the idea of these is if I take a couple of boards, now trick with these, all the boards have an arrow on them, it just gives you an alignment. So basically all the arrows facing the same way. And so what this is designed to do is to sit around the supports and act as a spacer. So one of the things you'll notice that when we've been talking about how big a table you make with this, it's bigger than the baseboards because you have these gaps sitting in between. Once you've done that, you then of course have your hex sitting, if I can get it right, sitting above that, and so you lose the joiner. So the joiner is basically hidden under the table. Okay, so in the kit you get a bunch of these as well. Okay, so I'm going to start by despruing this. Now, there's two sets of sprues happening here. So you have this section here which is sprued with each of the little pieces hanging off it, and that whole section is connected to the frame. So the easiest way to get these out is to actually either push down with your finger at the end there. Now if these things come loose like they have, it actually doesn't matter because we're going to desprue them all in a minute. The other option is to actually break the MDF frame. Right. and you see lots of pieces go flying everywhere. My suggestion would be have a couple little containers around so you can actually store these things in as you de-sprue. Okay, so basically, I've got myself a little container, basically getting the sprue and just giving them a quick push off. Get tons of those in there. Now, the best way to work it when you're doing these boards is not break them off one at a time and glue them in place. It's best to have a big reservoir of these so you can basically glue your board all at once and just work through them. It doesn't actually take very long, as you're going to see in just a second, but it takes a long time if you've got to constantly stop, get yourself more bits and pieces to do your actual work with. The other thing too is most of the centers on these have already dropped out, so this one hasn't. Make sure that you push those out before you go and start gluing your board together, because again that will be a pain in the neck. Okay, so I'm just going to try and show you how these pegs work. So you have three parts to the pegs. You have this part here. You have this large round circle and this small circle. Now the small circle is the bit that sits at the very top. So here's the principle. You take this, you glue it into the board. There's two holes to do that. You then take this part and slide it over the top so it sits flat like that, and then finally the little ring sits on the top of that. So the whole thing when completed should look like that. Okay, so what that looks like on an actual board and the process for doing it. Here's a board. I'm going to take my trusty PVA glue. And what I'm basically going to do is put a dab of glue, like wiping a line between the joints. I'll try and keep this on camera. Okay, normally I would do the whole board at once, but you get the idea. Okay, I'm then going to take my, I call them H pieces, but they're not really H's. I'm just going to push them straight in. Now again, don't do this on the kitchen table without some newspaper down or something. So each one of these boards has got 32 of these, and as you can see it's taking me not very much time to put them in. Okay, so now they've gone. Now the fact that I've swiped glue over to the sides now means that my circles, my large support rings, can just go in place straight over the top. The only thing I'm doing here that might not be completely obvious is pushing them down reasonably firmly, because what that's trying to do is to make sure that the H piece is standing as close to vertical as you can get it. It's difficult to see, but these ones are sitting there rocked a little bit side to side. But when I push the circle down on top, that'll actually fix that. Of course my hexes are now going to sit suspended on those pieces like that. I've got my spacer. The idea is that the spacer, between boards of course, sits over those circles. Now of course don't put any of those on because you've got wet glue everywhere. Okay, and so the final bit with this, again grab your glue, and what I do is basically put the nozzle on the spike once the glue is running. And just put a little dab of glue on the side. Doesn't take much to hold these in place. Then grab a handful of the little circles, slide them down.
the action I use is basically slide them on, push them with my thumb, and then wipe any excess glue off the top. You don't particularly have to, because that's your top surface that you're going to see coming through your actual hex board. So I just like to clean it up a little bit. Also just make sure that the smaller circle is down nice and flat, because again, as you're pulling it out, pulling your finger off, you don't want it to have it popping off the surface. It's difficult to see on that angle, but so that one's gone up at a strange angle, so I'm just pushing it down. Now you might see on this one, you can see a little bit of bleeding around the edge there on the top. Yeah, it doesn't hurt to wipe that off, although the PVA will actually contract down once it dries. If you had really huge blobs of glue, that's going to be a problem. Now, to give you an idea, that hex will now sit nicely in between those little spaces. Right, so there it is. So the golden rule is set it up by all means and give it a little test. Right, but don't leave any hexes on that. That's now got to be set away to dry. Okay, so how does the hex board work? You've got the baseboards like this. Okay, so how does the hex system actually work? We've got two baseboards here that I've already prepared. I've already mentioned they've got a spotting arrow on them, so I'm basically going to put them down like this. I'm going to grab my spacer and just place it in between. Right, now that's giving me the right separation for hexes. Now the hexes themselves have got corners cut out of them. If you look at it like that, you can see there. And the idea is that they sit on top of these larger circles, right, with these smaller circles actually providing links between them. So you can see that hex is sitting there. If I grab a pile of hexes, you can see that I can do stuff like this. In actual fact, I'm going to steal that hex out of there. And grab one of the fish hexes, which actually sits in and fills that end piece up, and so on. Okay, so that's kind of cool, but again, nothing you couldn't have done without a photocopier and some paper. What we've done though is then to take the hexes and then decorate the top of them. So here is one which I'm going to show you how I did that in a moment, but it's basically basing mix put over the top and then an ink wash put over the top of that. Of course, I've got some with woods on them, with some fields, and so I can make whatever sort of battlefield I want with those hexes going on in place. Now these are 4-inch hexes, or I think they're 101 millimeters. To give you an idea, there's a 15mm mounted miniature on the hex. Now because they're suspended, one of the things that I can do is I can actually decorate the back of this hex. And so in our kit that we're using here with our club, is we're going to have basically every hex will be plain on one side, and on the reverse side it'll have some feature. So for example, this one's got woods, on the reverse it'll be plain. Now these are, you can't tell from the video, but these have got a roughed texture over the top of them, so they're physically rough when I run my hand over them. One of the other options is, here's one which I've painted just with the standard house paint and then put it straight in the flock while it was wet, and that will then sit in. I can actually mix and match them in if I want to, but it also gives you a much cheaper way of doing your hexes, because if you're going to use a render texture, then there's a time investment in it, but it's also a cost of the materials and the painting and so on, whereas you can have the flock Of course, for me, I think that's probably going to be a little bit generic, so you'd want to do some stuff with, you know, putting different type of colour tones and things through it, so you get a bit of variation as you go across your board. Okay, so that's it in essence. We're really excited by this as a product. In a moment I'll spin it around and I'll show you some other things that we've done with it. But this for me gives you that ability to have highly flexible tabletop, right, that allows you to customize that however you want. For example, I want to have a road. I want that road to meander and go wherever I want across my table. I can do that with that. Okay, so the other thing that you can do is we'll be selling separately hexes cut out of exercise mat. Right, and basically they allow you to do these sorts of things. So I'm going to strip up a bunch of this. This piece here is 2 layers of exercise mat which have been cut down. Now I've cut a particular 45 degrees running out of each of the corner joints. Right, and again in the kit there'll be a little template to allow you to do that. I've just used a hot wire cutter, but you could also use a Stanley knife. Right, and this gives you the ability to have hills and things in your mat. Now, difficult to see there. Let me try and do it like this. Right, you can see that I've got some relief going on to my map, and so I've got completely flexible hills as well. Okay, so we've talked about the foam edged hex pieces. Right, so for example here you've got a hill. You see I've got a foam backed hex, right, and it locks into the board sitting underneath it. What I've also made is some specialised pieces to go on the top. Now if you look at these hexes carefully you'll see that they don't have the corners cut out of them. They're designed to sit above the layer of the piece. So if I flip one over, hopefully you can see on that the corners are intact. And that stops you getting this sort of effect here on the upper levels where I've got holes. Oops, you can't see that. Where I've got kind of holes that are unnecessary because there's no pegs filling those holes up. And so these are a separate item, right, that you get when you buy the hill packs. Right. The other thing that comes with those, and you'll see there's a fish shaped one, same without the corner cutouts. There's these risers that sit underneath the hexes. So basically it means that if I'm wanting to do a built up area, I'm going to, for most of the time, be using, built up. If I want to use a raised up area, most of the time I'm going to be using my generic hexes and just have foam for the edge of my hills, which allows me to make really massive features with only using spaces underneath them. So for example, in this situation here, if I had wanted a third level, I could then put this riser here and that would allow me to go again. Okay, so these are the riser sections and some specialised non-corner cut hexes that sit on top. The other specialist piece we've made is this, because the idea is that we want some ability to have some depression. So if you look at this on its side, you can see that it's actually 2 layers of MDF. So there's the top hex with this river section cut out, and I've made the supporting piece overlap. Right, and you basically use some alignment pegs to line those up, and that then can sit in your board, a place where you can see it. So sit in your board. Because I've got the actual hexes supported off the base of the board, then the river can actually run through there. Of course, with these ones, I'm unlikely to double-side it unless you wanted a feature with, you know, like an embankment or something like that on the other side. I mean, you could get interesting and make these into bocage, but we're not designed. They haven't been designed like that initially because they've got lots of curves and things in to make rivers. To give you a look at one that looks like pre-painting. So here's a river hex. Right, this is a loop back. So you can see there's the loop, the pieces that get stuck on the top of that. So again, that will be, these river sections will be available as a separate kit which you can add on. So to use the texture or render solution, I'm going to take my Battlefield Accessories render mix. Slightly used brush, you've got a bit of green on it. Basically what I'm doing here is I'm just basically putting texture all over the hex. What I'm going to do is try and avoid getting brush strokes and things into it, because that'll look not so great. Once it dries, it'll be really obvious, especially once I put the ink wash over it, which you'll see in a moment. Now, one of the things to watch for this, if I want to make this hex double-sidable, if that's a word, I've got to watch out. I've got a large build-up of texture there, so I'm going to swipe that off. So as the corner bits, just in those rounded hex corners, the 6 of them, is clear of too much debris, because that will mean that the hex doesn't sit flat when you double-side it. Now, for example, if I was doing this as some rocky ground, I was going to put some larger features on the things, that wouldn't bother, because this is going to be a one-side only hex. But if for my generic kind of ground hexes, I want to be able to flip those, so I'm going to do that like this. If I was going to do woods on this one, I've got some dark forest green basing mix. Again, I would put that around on here while I'm building it, so I have the light brown or the mud colour for the main terrain, and then my wood shape or my fields built onto that, and then I can ink wash that once it's done. So now that the basing mix is dry, you can pour some of this fantastic Woodland Scenics undercoat on it. Normally, of course, I would work from a palette, but just for this video, I'm just going to work this into the thing, which is allowing some of the texture to come through. And I'll show you what a dry one of these looks like in a moment. Right, so there's that. Now when this dries, of course, it'll look something like that. Right, which gives you that really nice kind of modelled ground effect. Of course, I could dry brush it and those sorts of things if I wanted to. It's difficult to see on this, but it's actually got a small layer of sand and grit and stuff on the surface. So if I want to flock this hex, I'm just going to take, now I've got a sample pot of Dulux paint in a really horrible green colour. What I'm going to do is come along, just give that a liberal coat of paint. I probably want to use a bigger brush. I'm just using my little modelling brush and just getting rid of any really large build-ups of paint. Okay, so giving it a coat, get my flock. And there we have one flocked hex. Really, really quick, and if you used a bigger brush, you could whack them all out, pour flock over them, tap it down, tip it off, go again. You would very quickly have yourself a full set of hexes ready to go. It's one of those things that it does take a little bit of investment and time to actually get the thing set up, but once it's set up, it's then done, and you're going to get lots and lots of use out of it. It's like having a really well designed base mat. Once you've got that, you're going to use it over and over again, and it'll really make everything else that you do on top of that in terms of your figure painting and the rest of it really pop. Okay, so that's how we detail the tops of hexes.